Hello, and in this video I'm going to look at the topic of the weather. Now, you often get questions about the weather in part 1 of IELTS speaking, and you can certainly use some complex language about the weather in many topics for part 2. It probably isn't as useful for part 3, but certainly for part 1 and 2 you can often add something about the weather, or if it's a part 1 topic specifically about the weather, then hopefully you'll find this video useful. Now, it's often good to use idioms in IELTS speaking, not in IELTS writing, but certainly for IELTS speaking, and this is one that you probably know. It's raining cats and dogs. Personally, I have never used this idiom in my life apart from reading it in this PowerPoint. It's not something native speakers regularly use. It's quite an old-fashioned one, and so if you want to impress the IELTS examiner, let's learn some complex vocabulary, some complex idiomatic vocabulary and some collocations that are much more likely to get you a higher band score in IELTS. So I will go through some useful phrases and what they mean. To be below freezing. So if you come from a country like I do, the UK, where it frequently is -4, -5, this means the temperature is below freezing. So you could say something like, in my country, the temperature is regularly below freezing. Or if you come from a hot country, you can say the temperature is never below freezing. Again, one for people who come from colder countries, to be bitterly or to be freezing cold. So in my country, it is bitterly cold in winter. It is actually 2 degrees today, so it is bitterly cold. It is freezing cold. But always remember, if you come from a hot country, just use these as a negative. In my country, it's never bitterly cold. It's never freezing cold. Actually, I would prefer it if it was. A tropical storm. Now, we don't really get these in the UK because it doesn't get hot enough, but if you come from a country where it gets very, very hot and you come from a tropical country, you can say often in the summer months we have tropical storms. Not a cloud in the sky. Now, it's not often I can use this expression because it's often very cloudy in the UK. But if you frequently have sunny days where there is not a cloud in the sky, then you can use this. If you are talking about a time you visited a park or a public place, or you're talking about a trip somewhere, you could say, it was a beautiful day, there was not a cloud in the sky. So remember, these are not just useful for part 1, talking about the weather, you can add them into your part 2. To be rained off. This means to be not able to do something because of the rain, and this often happens in the UK. For example, a cricket match was rained off because it starts raining and then it can't be played. So you could say things like, we were going for a picnic, but it was rained off because the weather was horrendous. Sunny spells. These are short periods of sun, and these are what we often get in the UK. So it's not sunny all day with not a cloud in the sky, but you often get sunny spells, so short periods of sunshine. Let's look at the topic of rain. Now, you can use rain with certain words, and we call these collocations. So we talk about heavy rain. It was raining heavily, or that day there was heavy rain, and it means when it's raining a lot. Torrential rain, and this again means it's very heavy, it's raining a lot. Intermittent rain means it rained for a short time, then stopped, and then rained again. So it's happening for short periods, but frequently. Light rain is the opposite of heavy rain. So if it's raining but it's not raining very much. We use heavy and light with other words like a light lunch. We don't say a heavy lunch, but we say a light lunch when you're just eating a small amount of food. You can say, I'm a heavy sleeper, and this means that you sleep very deeply. You can say, I'm a light sleeper, which means you wake up easily. So heavy and light often collocate with other words. So let's take a look at some idiomatic language, and rather than saying it's raining cats and dogs or it was raining cats and dogs, it's chucking it down. And this means it's raining very heavily. It's chucking it down. When it's raining quite lightly and at the start of the rain, you can say it's spitting. It's spitting. When it's raining very lightly, it's not heavy rain, it's drizzling. It's drizzling. And when it's raining very, very heavily, it's pouring down. It's pouring down. Now, don't need to learn all of these, but just think of a few that might be useful for talking about where you live or talking about when you've done particular things that might come up in part 2, and think, yes, I'm going to use it's pouring down because that will be very useful, or a tropical storm, or freezing cold, bitterly cold. So choose 4 or 5 and try to learn those. Let's have a look now at some useful sentences that you might be able to use if you're asked part 1 questions about the weather. I'm a sun worshipper, so summer is by far my favourite season. There's often a question, what's your favourite season? I'm a sun worshipper. This means you love the sun. When the sun comes out, you feel happy. You're a sun worshipper. Summer is by far. This means by a long way. In summer, when it's humid, I get all hot and bothered and I can't stand it. Humid is when it's very hot and sticky and the air feels wet because of the moisture in the air, and you get hot and bothered. Hot and bothered is a collocation. It's like hot and annoyed and angry. So in summer, when it's humid, I get all hot and bothered and I can't stand it. So this is a bit like being the opposite of a sun worshipper. And if you're not that keen on the sun, you could say, I'm not a massive fan of sunbathing, so I tend to stay out of the sun. To stay out of the sun means to stay in the shade, so to go to a shaded area because you don't like sunbathing. If you get too much sun, you can suffer from something called sunstroke, and you usually get a very bad headache, you are sick, and you feel quite ill for maybe 24 hours, 48 hours. I once got sunstroke and it was awful, so I stay in the shade now. Remember, I keep repeating this, IELTS isn't a true or false test, so even if you haven't got sunstroke, if you're talking about weather and saying you're not keen on the sun, you're not a sun worshipper, I once got sunstroke and it was awful, so I stay in the shade now. IELTS is a test of language, so impress them with your use of language. Now in the UK, where I live, it is often very cloudy, and a way of describing this is to say it is overcast. More often than not, it is quite overcast in my hometown, so the sky is full of clouds and you can't see the sun. More often than not is like saying mostly, most of the time. I'm not keen on gloomy days when the sky is full of clouds. Gloomy means miserable, sad. So when the sky is full of clouds, when it's overcast, you can describe it as a gloomy day. And finally, I know it sounds weird, but I love thunderstorms with thunder and lightning. So I know it sounds strange. I love thunderstorms with thunder. This is the sound that a storm makes, and the lightning is where the light flashes. So you're saying, I know it sounds weird, I know it sounds strange, because most people don't usually like that kind of weather. So like I said before, don't try and learn everything, but if you can pick 4 or 5 phrases and try at some point to get them into your IELTS answer, you can use them in a part 2. So often you can't think of enough to talk about in part 2, but think about adding the weather into the answer if you're describing a situation when something happened. Thanks for watching.